Hello, my name is Phillip Toney. This is my presentation for my final exam. Today I'm going to be covering multiple pieces of information that we covered from modules 4 through 6. And some of those main concepts we're going to cover are tying EE into activity planning, some of the failures of EE and how it supports cultural values. And I'm going to go ahead and get started because we've got a lot to cover. So module 4, the first thing I'm going to talk about is identifying learners and engaging them. So how do we identify learner needs? The biggest thing here is you should really get to know your students. So a huge part of effectively teaching a lesson and effectively teaching a group of students is knowing your students. So obviously you need to know very simple aspects like their age range, or grade level, that kind of stuff. But you should also have familiarity with their background knowledge. And then it's even better if you can get some knowledge of what their interests are to try to tie that in. And that also encapsulates into how we engage them. So to be more engaging, you need to make it relevant and meaningful for them, and then try to make it enjoyable. And again, some of that can come from knowing their interest, knowing a little bit about their background, or their cultures, whatever it might be, and being able to tie that in. And then you should also be able to give your students some kind of ownership into the lesson, and that'll make it more engaging as well. And the last thing I want to touch on there is just being interesting. So when you as a teacher are excited and interested in the topic, it makes it much easier and more common for the students to kind of follow suit. Some instructional methodologies that are used in EE. The first one is simulations and models. This allows students to practice skills in real life type situations and challenge some of their misconceptions. Case studies allows them to answer a question and develop some sort of solution to a problem, or even multiple solutions. Usually, again, these are real world scenarios, and sometimes and often they're open-ended problems. So they may not just have one solution available. Problem-based learning, this is where students examine a problem, evaluate the possible solutions to solve it, and then report back. Kind of similar to case studies as far as description goes, because again, you're solving a problem. The fourth one is project-based learning, or PBL. This is a very popular one. This is where students produce a project to showcase their understanding of a concept, and again, oftentimes real-world applications there. And then the last one here is storytelling, and that is where you make the subject accessible and increase positive emotions because you're allowing them to kind of connect to it a little bit better. And because of that, it often draws in attention of new learners a little bit better than some of the other methodologies. A sixth one is future problem solving. So this is similar to the one that we saw a little bit ago, except for in this 6-step model, you're problem solving for future topics. So things that aren't necessarily problems yet, but that we can identify as most likely being future problems. Hands-on observation and discovery in the environment. So this is where you can immerse students into the environment with a learn by doing approach, and they're actually getting hands-on, just as the title of that methodology shows. Inquiry, students observe and investigate a question, which is where you get the inquiry from, and then problem solve to deduce answers. They can really take ownership in this style of learning, which makes it very effective as well. Cooperative learning is another very popular one. This is the use of small groups to engage social learning and teamwork. And each student should contribute something to the group and to their learning. And then the last one is service learning, and this is where students work with the community or organizations within the community to solve community problems. And those can either be direct or indirect services, or it could even just be an advocacy-based type project where they're spreading information or the word about something that they've learned about. 5 key elements when planning EE activities. When you're choosing instructional methods, they'll be most effective for you if you look at things like, first of all, the learning objective, second of all, the amount of time required, third, the available resources and the support or involvement of the stakeholders, 4, the characteristics of your learners, and 5, the environmental setting that you're in. What are the benefits of non-formal settings? Using a non-formal setting allows students to make stronger connections, and it also takes some of that pressure off as far as making mistakes. So they can link their learning to personal experiences, And this typically creates a stronger bond, and it'll help drive interest a lot of times. One of the barriers with this, though, is scheduling in a short time or location, um, or excuse me, a shortage of time or location. So you just don't have places to do it, or you don't have the time to do it. Some of your students may have special needs, or they may struggle with changes, um, and they they may also have health and safety concerns. And again, that would typically be coming from like your administration or stakeholders. So while these outdoor settings or non-formal settings can be great, it does also carry with it some barriers. Some reliable sources for EE materials. The National Wildlife Federation is a great one. National Geographic, of course, has been very popular for a long time. The Audubon Society is very large as well. National Wildlife Society, and then the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, or NOAA. Ways to integrate technology into EE. The three that I chose, the first one is virtual field trips. So there's a lot of websites out there or different resources that you can use to take virtual field trips. You can create your own, or you could even just go on to something as simple as Google Maps. And I've done that with my students in the past, and it's a good way to kind of get them into those settings in a very easy way, but where it does immerse them a little bit. There's also number two, a lot of mobile apps like ArcGIS or iNaturalist, and those apps are a lot of times free and easy to incorporate into a program, and also gives your students the ability, especially if they're a little bit older, to use their own technology within the classroom. And then the last one is Zoom. This is a very basic one, and certainly not the most immersive, but it does allow for very easy collaboration, and it's very easy for a lot of people to use, and most people have access to it. When you're evaluating EE materials, some of the things you want to look at is it accurate and inclusive? So are those materials accurate to the statements? Emphasis on skill building. You're building lifelong skills that enable creative and social skills, or social and critical thinking skills. So there's a lot of skill building within a good piece of EE material or a good EE activity. Depth of understanding. So you're aiming to develop their personal awareness, and then also a conceptual understanding of whatever it is you're covering. So you want to see, is it doing that? Personal and civic responsibility. A large part of why we do what we do is to promote personal and civic responsibility. And so you want to make sure that your materials you're using are doing that. Instructional effectiveness. So are the materials relying on principles and techniques that create effective and inclusive learning environments? And then the last one is usability. So are they well designed and easy to use? Is it easy for you as a teacher to use it? And is it easy for your students to use? Module 5, why do we do assessments and what does it involve? Assessments are done to understand where our students are at. So how much have they learned of what we wanted them to learn? And it gives you insight into that, and again, helps you know your students a little bit better. And lastly, it can also help you improve your lessons. So if you know your students are struggling with something, it allows you to kind of regroup and then attack it maybe a different way. And they can do this through different ways, and we'll talk about those here in a second. But to do this, you must make your expectations explicit in public, set high standards, and then analyze and interpret how well they perform whenever you have those assessments. And what they do is they assess and evaluate all domains of learning. They assess the higher levels of the cognitive domain, like analyzing. They assess their critical thinking, and then they prepare students for the future. Some challenges to assessments. Obviously, they can be time consuming, especially when you start kind of going through that raw data. It can become very time consuming. Sometimes it's difficult to make valid and reliable assessments, and then making assessments worth the effort. So are they worth doing, first of all, but then are there better ways you can do it, or how often should you do those assessments? Those all become questions that you have to think about. Two assessment types that I'm going to talk about here are peer instruction and role play. So peer instruction, that's where you have students present and instruct to their peers. We've done that in class, and it allows them to really become kind of content area experts on a certain subject, and then essentially they share that out with the group. And again, this allows them to take more ownership of that, but it also allows them to have some of that interactive and collaborative learning with their classmates, but also show that they've learned what you needed them to learn. And so it can be a type of assessment. The second one is role play. This is where you allow students to take on the role of someone or something. I did this in my Plan a Park activity where I allowed them to become a park planner. And this can allow them to act and speak as if they were in that role. And it gives them maybe a little bit more appreciation for certain roles, but again, also gives them some ownership and some creative flexibility when they're, taking on that task. Examples of a good learning objective. The one that I put is students will be able to identify and describe 3 characteristics of what makes a good learning objective after completing lesson 5.2 and apply that knowledge to compose their own learning objective. So obviously I kind of turned this around to show how, writing a good learning objective can be done to create a learning objective. And it's an example of a good one because it follows the SMART strategy and it also follows the ABCDs. So SMART meaning that it's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. And then ABCDs meaning that I've included my audience, my behavior, the condition, and the degree of mastery. So you can see all of those aspects when you read through that. Different types of assessments: baseline, formative, and summative. Baseline, you're going to do that at the beginning. So that's where you're getting an idea of what they know before you've even really started it. And this could be something like a pretest or a survey that's done beforehand. And this is a great thing to do, again, to get an idea of where your students are already at. Formative assessment can be done during the instruction. So let's say your lesson's a week long. Throughout the week, at a couple of points, you might do some sort of formative assessment. It's usually something that's informal. A lot of times they're kind of quick hitters, and this can be used to get some feedback about where they're at, and know if there's something you need to reteach or a different direction you need to go. These can be simple questions. It could be a discussion that you have with a group or even with a singular student or a small group. And then even just observations, or it can be something a little bit more formal like a quiz. And then summative, of course, occurs at the end of the unit. This is where you're seeing, out of all of the things I needed them to master, how much of that did they get? And so this is usually a little more formal, something like a test or a comprehensive project. When formative and summative assessment shows that our students aren't understanding, then we need to figure out what to do. So if during a formative assessment they're showing you that they're not understanding, first thing you need to look at is it a large group of my students or a small group? If it's a large group, then maybe you need to reteach the lesson completely or rework your materials, and kind of go back and do that reteach. If it's a small percentage, that may mean that while your larger group is doing something different the next day, you're doing a small group activity with the others, to, again, reteach that or drive home kind of that information you need them to get, and then kind of take it from there and hope that gets everybody kind of on the same page. And then on a very basic level, if they're not doing well during a formative assessment, then that may just mean that they need more time to practice or study the material. If it happens during the summative assessment, then you should reflect again on how you could improve. So this kind of goes back again to, was it a large group or a small group of students? And that's where you would start, and then take it from there. As far as if it's a large group of students, maybe you really need to just rework this whole, lesson or this whole unit. If it's a small group of students, there's still ways that you could make it better than in the future. You could go back and reteach if you really needed to, but we know realistically as teachers, a lot of times it's hard to, be able to do so because you're on a time crunch essentially, and you need to get through a certain amount of material in a certain amount of time. And so you may not have the time to go back and completely reteach a lesson when you've already spent a week or two on it, but you may find ways, and this is what I would do, to incorporate the things that your students struggled with into future lessons, especially if you're teaching a subject that builds on previous lessons, or wherever you can interweave it. What types of questions are included in a good exam? Questions should be fair. They should relate to the information that you covered in the class, obviously. Um, but you should also aim for higher order thinking questions or higher level thinking. So you want them to do things like analyze and use the information that they have to answer questions that are not of the most basic level. So you don't just want this, memorize and regurgitate. You want them to use the information that you've taught them to be able to analyze and really delve into whatever those subjects are. And because of that, it's also best a lot of times if you mix the types of questions that you have. Of course, there's going to be times that you don't, or that it doesn't make sense to do so. But it's better if you do, just because then you're not giving preference over one type of student to another. So some are really going to do great with those, extended answer questions and really struggle with something as simple as true and false. And then, of course, you're going to have the other end of that. Why should you do program evaluations? Number one, it helps you and anybody else that's involved with the program to understand what is and is not working. It can provide insight into how you can improve the program. It can provide information used for budget decisions or program decisions. It helps you increase learning, and then it can improve your success in the field as well, knowing where the people that are part of that program are at. There's front-end evaluations, formative and summative. Front-end evaluations are done at the beginning of the program and give you information that will guide it. So a lot of times this will be done in something like a needs assessment to figure out what it is your program needs to be successful. Formative is going to happen again, just like when we talked about the assessments earlier for evaluations. The formative evaluations are going to happen while you're doing the program. And the earlier the better. So it could be during something like a pilot program where you can get early feedback to make the program better. And then summative evaluations happen at the end, and this where you get information as far as how effective or worth the program was. And it'll tell you what you should continue or not continue, or if you should even continue the program at all. What do you include in evaluation purpose statements? The purpose statement provides the purpose behind the program, and it should include the why, who, and what for. It also identifies who's going to use the results of the evaluation and why. What do you include in an EE program description? You should include the situation, outputs, outcomes, inputs, and assumptions. The situation is the setting or context where the program's being developed. Outputs are the activities or events that are going to be products of this. Outcomes are what changes are going to occur because of the program, or what impact is it going to have. The inputs are what resources you need in order to accomplish this, and then the assumptions are going to be the beliefs about the way the program works and its underlying principles. And how do you select evaluation questions? There's 5 questions to consider. You should ask yourself if the evaluation question would be of interest to the primary user of the evaluation. Number 2, if it's going to contribute information that's not already known. Number 3, if it's going to provide information that can be acted upon. So is it something that's going to give us feedback we can use later? Number 4, is it going to be of continuing interest, and it's not just personal. So is it for the greater good and not just a pet project of yours? And then number 5 is it going to be answerable with the time, money, and skill that's available to you? Indicators, information sources, tools, and design sampling are used in evaluations. I'm just going to look at the first one here. So for the evaluation question, have students develop the ability to create EE lessons with which adhere and connect to state and national standards? That's your evaluation question. The indicator is going to be that students are going to give you feedback from the class surveys, and you're looking for, in this case, 80% of the students in the class showing that they found those lessons to be effective and impactful. The information sources is who you're getting it from. So in this case, it's our students. The tools that we're going to need are going to be those student surveys that are filled out. Here I put that, it'd be approximately 8 to 10 questions. And then the design and sampling. This is a one group post test, so there was no sampling for that one. All students would need to fill out that survey, but of course you could, in different questions or different evaluations, you could look at just having certain groups do that for you. Module 6, the fundamental needs of EE. All education is hinged on students meeting their fundamental needs. Students will struggle in any learning environment, EE included, if they don't have the access to the most basic things like food, water, shelter, and they need to feel that sense of security and safety. And you should make them feel belonged in the classroom, make them feel like it's a safe space to learn and share. You can't control what happens outside of the school, but you can control what happens in your classroom for the most part, and that's what you need to try to do. The idea of game face, gender, age, medical conditions, experience, familiarity, abilities, culture, and ethnicity. That's what that acronym stands for. And this goes back to the very first thing I talked about, which is knowing your students and understanding them better. So their backgrounds, their needs, the diversity that they have. That by understanding game face, it's going to allow you to build rapport and know your students better. EE's failed to create a climate for basically people of color and indigenous people, people of lower income areas. All of them have kind of unfortunately been left out of EE because EE is essentially designed by more affluent and privileged groups and taught by upper class whites. So EE is often the antithesis of urban life and industrialization and leaves those populations out because of that. And so because of that as well, it also studies have shown that people of color and lower economic individuals are less concerned with the environment and less likely to support or rally around those issues. And they also have a lack of interest or concern with them because they have limited access and they don't have the ability or can't afford to go out and join those types of clubs or travel. Research, I thought the slide changed there. Dominant culture values, what are they? So these are typically the values of white middle class schools and institutions. EE supports these, again, like we saw in the last one, because it doesn't necessarily address social and cultural aspects of communities. It doesn't always do justice to the genders, races, classes, or histories that the topics cover. And because of that, it kind of leaves them out and sticks to that dominant culture. Guiding EE principles that we may need to question in order to change this. So EE places a strong emphasis on science, which makes sense, but it focuses primarily on Western science. And I think that we need to allow other scientific communities to become a part of how we view our natural relationships. And this is especially pertinent with indigenous knowledge and experiences. EE should also use more local knowledge of the communities that it's within. And this would allow you to incorporate linguistic, cultural, religious, or ethnic diversities to allow it to become more universal. So we can make it more inclusive by having more diversity and valuing that to enrich our context, affirming cultural backgrounds of our students, believing in high achievement goals for all of our students, regardless of race or class, holding multicultural commitments to the values of equity and cultural diversity, and changing our dispositions about the world around us. Culturally responsive teaching is an approach that where we empower students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically by using cultural references. And we can recognize and redress bias in the system. That'll allow us to bring real world issues into the classroom. We can draw on students' culture to shape the curriculum and the instruction, and we can model high expectations for all students, kind of like we saw in the last slide there. It also promotes respect for student differences, collaborates with families of local communities, reflects on the cultural lens of the teacher in this case, and then communicates in linguistically and culturally responsive ways. Multicultural environmental education, an educational process that helps others be more aware of, accepting of, and understanding of other cultures and traditions. How does this mesh with EE? When we expose other cultures or give exposure to other cultures and show respect for that and the environmental justice and community involved, those components of multicultural education allow us to enrich EE. So those should be significant components of your EE program. How does multicultural education CRT differ from intercultural education? Intercultural education or environmental education is a methodology that tries to connect to members of dominant groups through exchanges with diverse groups. And it can also decolonize the indigenizing issues in mainstream environmental education. How's it different from multicultural education? Multicultural environmental education aims to create opportunities and education and a positive attitude towards differences in groups, while intercultural environmental education aims to learn and share with those cultures to promote harmony, justice, and understanding. So they are very similar, but there is a little bit of a difference there. To look at some of our overarching themes, what are the primary goals and benefits of EE? It aims to raise awareness, nurture, and appreciation for and educate others on ecologically sustainable futures. And we want students to be active stewards for the environment and to make informed decisions. 10 things to think about when you're getting ready to do an EE activity. First, I think you need to make sure it connects to the standards. Secondly, you want to get to know your students, their interests, cultures. I talked about that earlier. 3, present it in different points of view. Number 4, look for and avoid biased curriculums. Number 5, you want to work to educate more than you advocate. So teach them how to think, not what to think. Number 6, use multiple modes of inquiry and learning styles. Again, all students learn a little bit differently. Try to incorporate different ones. Number 7, you want to set high expectations and challenge all of your students. Number 8, create a positive learning environment where students feel safe and comfortable learning. I talked about that earlier. Number 9, prepare your lessons in a way that will allow you to change or evaluate them in the future. We talked about that with the evaluations. And then make learning collaborative and inclusive for your students. To move towards behavior change, this is going to be dependent on each individual student. We know from our own activity that there's different styles of behavior change. Some people are more intrinsically motivated, while others need external motivations. And because of that, everybody's going to need a little bit different pathway in order to getting to behavior change. So a lesson on the ocean can connect to lessening single-use plastic use, and a lesson on watershed destruction and pollution may lead to decreased water use. Something such as global warming may lead to community activism. Those are just some examples of how a lesson could impact a student moving towards some sort of behavior change. I do think that the lessons from PLT, wet and wild, can all lead to behavior change if students are impacted enough by that lesson. I know there was some lessons such as the deforestation one and PLT. Those might lead students to be more actively engaged in the fight against deforestation. In summary, I hope to have shown you some of the variety of concepts and knowledge that I've learned and that we talked about throughout this half of the semester. And I want to thank you again for everything, for this presentation, and also for a great class this year. Thank you.